Hey everyone, this is Nitro. In this video, I am going to be explaining the way critical hits work in Langrisser Mobile. In truth, Langrisser Mobile's damage is fixed. What that means is, depending on your attack value compared to, let's say, the enemy's defense value, or your int versus the enemy's magic defense, you will do a fixed rate of damage. If you repeat it will be the same amount of damage every single time. There is only one exception to this, and that is critical hits. Critical hits, in other words, is the only way to affect the preset damage that you will deal. It's also important to note, however, what is not well known, which is that crit hits are separated between the soldiers and the general. So there's actually four different scenarios. The first scenario is neither Omega or the soldiers crit hit. The second scenario will be Omega crit hits, but the Dark Elf snipers do not. The third scenario is the Dark Elf snipers crit hit, while Omega does not. And then the final scenario is both Omega and the Dark Elf snipers crit hit to do maximum damage. So there is that element of, I guess, luck involved in the damage system. So I'm just going to demonstrate at least 3 of these examples. And to do so, I'm going to use Omega, who has no gear on him, attack an Executioner. Okay. This Executioner has 748 defense, which will basically reduce my Omega, who has no gear at this time. His damage will be 1, right? Since his attack is less than the enemy defense. The Dark Elf snipers, however, because they get this 36% attack increase, they have more attack than the Executioner's defense, allowing them to do some damage as a result. So it will be some damage, but it won't be enough to kill the Executioner. But overall, this will be a great way to demonstrate the way crit hits work. So let's just begin. So for the first example, what I need is for Omega to attack and not do any kind of crit hits for basically the base damage output effect. So he's going to move down and strike. So here, there was no crit hit at all, and so we saw that in total, Omega ended up doing 5,340 damage to the Executioner. Right, so that is the baseline damage that is dealt by Omega and the Dark Elf Sniper without either of them landing a crit hit. We're looking to see the damage that the Dark Elf Snipers will do to the Executioner. So, with a crit and without a crit hit. So here, he attacks. A crit hit is landed. Damage was 5,340. Okay? And the reason it was only 5,340 with a crit hit was because Omega landed that crit hit. The Dark Elf Snipers did not land a crit hit there. So Omega landing a crit hit only ended up doing 1 damage per hit, whereas the Dark Elf Snipers ended up doing their 5,340 damage. So there's a crit hit. The damage was 6,940 damage in total. The Executioner was knocked down to 2,072 hit points. So with my setup just now, we saw the 3 different scenarios that were replicable with this kind of setup, right? Where I did 5,340 damage, 5,340 damage yet again, and then 6,940 in the situation where the Dark Elf Snipers crit hit. Even in the situation where both Omega and the Dark Elf Snipers would crit hit, it would still be 6,940 in this case, since Omega has such low attack value that he will not be able to overwhelm the Executioner's defense. But this, if you keep repeating this endlessly, no matter what, you will always only get these 3 damage values. There will not be any scenario where the damage numbers will be different from 5,340 or 6,940. So that just demonstrates that the damage you deal is fixed except for the crit hit factor. So clearly, this means that, once again, Omega can crit hit, Dark Elf Snipers can crit hit, and it can lead to different damage results depending on who lands a crit and who doesn't. So an interesting thing to note then is soldiers who have a crit hit chance increase will only crit hit chance increase themselves, the soldiers themselves. Their crit hit chance increase does not affect your general's crit hit chance. So with that covered, let's then talk about AoE attacks. Right? AoE attacks also have a chance of landing a crit hit, and the damage they would deal would be different every time as a result. So let's have Lana toss out an AoE here, right? And if she uses Heaven Sanction, we have to pay attention to see the pop-up numbers. So both pop-up numbers were yellow, which meant she landed crit hits there. However, the thing that's confusing here is that when landing those kind of crit hits, you can crit hit both the enemy hero as well as the enemy soldiers, right? And it doesn't really tell you which one you actually landed the crit hit on unless you check the damage you dealt, right? If I take a look here, for example, the Guardian Infantry didn't take that much damage, whereas the Executioner took quite a lot. So clearly the Executioners got crit hit in this case, and the Guardian Infantry didn't, right? And if I take a look at the High Lord in this case, the High Lord did not get crit hit, whereas the Phalanx soldiers clearly did. So the two damage pop-ups, the different characters got crit hit there. Yeah. If I were to do a numbers breakdown at this point, right? With a crit hit on the Executioner, I did a total of 2,143 damage, right? On the Guardian Infantry, which did not get crit hits, they took 2,321, which makes sense that they took a bit more because their magic defense is much lower than the Executioners, right? As for the High Lord and Executioner, right? The High Lord, let's bring that up once again. The High Lord only took a measly 1,922 damage without getting crit hit. Right? And then finally, the Phalanx soldiers, well, they got crit hits, right? And they took 3,267 damage. So you can kind of see from these damage numbers roughly how much damage you do when you crit hit and when you don't, right? Here's one more attempt at it with Lana tossing out another Heaven Sanction, and we'll see what kind of damage it does once more. So, I saw a 4,000 damage mark, and then I kind of missed it, to be honest. But here, if we do an analysis once more, for the Executioner, it took, I think, the exact same damage as last time, right? 2143. Okay. The Guardian Infantry looks to be at the same hit points as well, 2321. But the Phalanx, the Lancers, are at 2498 damage. So last time the Phalanx soldiers took 1922. Right? So there is a difference here. The crit hit here clearly hit the Lancer General, doing a bit of additional damage, 500. Right? It depends how you look at it. On one hand, you can say it's only 500 damage. On the other hand, the difference between 1922 and 2498, it's a big percentage, right? If I do 2498 minus 1922, you're looking at 576 damage difference. And 576 divided by 1922 is equals to basically 30% increased damage from that crit hit. So there you have it. And then finally, as for the Phalanx soldiers, the Phalanx soldiers have lost 2513 hit points, right? So 2513 hit points versus the 3267 they lost in the last attempt. Once again, I think that is 30%, isn't it? Let me see. Yeah, it is 30%. So clearly, in this case, the crit hit, Lana's Heaven Sanction, when she lands a crit hit, is doing 30% more damage. Right? And this is what we see out of the two tests that I've done. And so there we have it, the breakdown of the way crit hits work. Now, just for a conclusion, I'm going to just show a quick Excel, I guess, chart that I created for you guys to view these numbers in general. So here we see that in the first scenario, I had Omega attack 4 times with different scenario each time. An Omega attack where nobody does any kind of crit hits does 5,340 damage for me. An Omega attack where only Omega crits, keep in mind in this case Omega's attack is below the defense value of the Executioner, also only does 5,340 damage. When Omega attacks and the soldiers land a crit hit, it does 6,940 damage, which is a 30% damage increase on the 5,340 value. For that calculation, I took this number and subtracted it from the other number, which gave me 1,600. And then 1,600 divided by the base number of 5,340 gave me 29.96% or 30%. And finally, in the fourth scenario where Omega attacks and both the soldiers and Omega crits, well, because Omega is only doing 1 damage regardless of whether he crit hits or not, it still remains 6,940 damage. But in a case where Omega's attack is higher than the Executioner's defense, obviously the damage would spike up as well. And then, as for Lana's Heaven Sanction, I only did 2 situations, right, where I only tried it twice. So, Lana's Heaven Sanction, when it does a regular strike to each of these enemies, it does the following damage: 2143, 2321, 1922, and 2513. When it lands a crit hit, for the infantry, I didn't know. For both attempts, it landed a regular strike, but for the Lancer, Leader, and Soldier, there was a 2498 damage and 3267 damage. And in both of these cases, following the same calculation I used above, in both of these cases, it was equal to a 30% damage increase. And there you have it. So that's everything I guess you need to know about crit hits. If in all situations it is a 30% damage increase, it can be very significant if your leader lands a crit hit along with the soldiers, because leaders in particular have much more attack value than the soldiers do, right? If I just quickly jump back into the game, for example, as a brief mention, I'm going to just bring up my Omega at this point, who I've given back his gear. And Omega, right? First, let's talk about the soldiers, right? The soldiers only have 520 attack, okay? Yes, they get that 36% attack increase, but it's still relatively low. By comparison though, Omega starts with 496 plus 419. With a faction buff, he can easily get up to like 1200 attack or so, if not 1400, somewhere like that. So it's a huge attack increase compared to the Dark Elf Snipers, which means a crit hit would lead to significantly more damage if your leader is the one to land it. So that's everything I wanted to say. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you found this information useful. And on that note, Nitro out.